this continues? What if something happens like this continuously, and if they don't reach an agreement, and then that really does impact supply chain? I mean, that's a big impacting factor for many, many people, especially during an election. I'm sure that it's going to be a continuing talk among candidates. But yeah, it's a very intriguing thing to think about. And one of the industries as well that I think I never considered, I never really thought about those port workers. And so, yeah, I just think it's an interesting topic to discuss and even consider.
True. Yeah, I think it's a potential disaster that looks like it's been averted. So
yeah,
we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Yeah. Talking about the supply chain and talking about, the different embargo in 73, I mean, it's just like there was so much limited supply of oil that we were producing in the United States, and how much we need foreign oil. I mean, so you go from, and why do we need foreign oil? Because we use so much oil in the United States. I mean, President Bush, George W. in 2006, in his State of the Union address, he says, I don't like to use this, but he said, we have an addiction to oil. I mean, we definitely have we want to drive to work. We want to have the plastics and the roads and so many different products that are used for oil that we've got to have it. I mean, it's like, we don't function without it. We want to have our food transported from A to B. I mean, there's just so many different things that go. So I tell you, it's an amazing story, and your job's never done, Thomas, because you're going to have so many different things.
Yeah, interesting point, because in 2008, we imported 13 million barrels a day of crude oil in this country. And because of the miracle of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling technology, we are in North America now a net exporter of crude oil in just a very few years. And so, we have gone from having an import bill on the order of $250 billion a year to becoming a net exporter of energy. When you include coal, natural gas, and crude oil, the U.S. is a net exporter of energy, and it's had incredible benefits to the U.S. economy.
Yeah. We produce about 20 million a day. We can't refine all of it, but we also send some over. We do get some from Canada, Mexico. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's like, but because of that, it's like the Permian Basin. We talk a lot about the Permian Basin on the project. We have a lot of projects there, but we have one of the things they were producing like 1 million barrels a day a few years ago because of vertical wells. Today it's over 6 million barrels a day, every day. 5 million more barrels a day come out of the Permian Basin, which is just unbelievable. But it's all because of horizontal drilling and fracture. Big fracks put on all these wells, these 2, 3, 4 mile long laterals that are going today. So it is, and so it's allowing us to produce more, which is better. I don't know if oil prices are going to continue to go down or they're going to stay up because of what's going on with our production. But anyway, how'd you get started with Shell Oil? There's some key lessons that I want to talk about there. But you went from getting your PhD, getting Dr. Thomas Bates on your door, to taking it off and saying, no, call me Tom or Thomas. Then you went to Shell Oil. Where was your first 20 years in your career?
Well, that's exactly right. I went to work for Shell, and I had a PhD in mechanical engineering, and I wanted to do research for my career and ultimately come back to the University of Michigan, which is where I graduated, and teach. And I got a couple of years into that mission, and I learned one of the great lessons of my life, which is that research is really boring for me. My first project at Shell, I put a piece of steel in an oven and kept it there for 6 months, and then took it out and polished it and looked at how much the microstructure had changed in 6 months. That is a boring job. So I became a drilling engineer. I went out in the field, and I haven't looked back since then. And I actually discovered something about me, which is something that I am trying to do in the latter stages of my career, when I was a graduate student at Michigan, or the end of my undergraduate, I wish I'd had a mentor that would have put his arm around me and said, "Hey, Tom, why don't you think about doing something other than engineering?" And that's actually one of the beauties of the program that we have at TCU is in the MBA program, everybody has a mentor. Every single student gets a personal mentor. In fact, at noon today, I'm going to go meet with a former baseball player at TCU, Austin Henry, and we're going to talk about his career. He's in the Energy MBA program. And that's something that I wish everybody had an opportunity to do, is to talk to someone who's currently working in industry and just get some mentoring advice.
Wow.
And I probably mentor 20 or 25 students on a
Oh,
regular
wow.
basis. And that is, I mean, it's just so much fun because my students are so thirsty for knowledge. They're so ambitious. They just want to succeed.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that we've talked a lot about on the Jay Young show here. Well, two things really. One of them is that we really want to help inspire and give knowledge to those that are looking to take on their entrepreneurial quest. And then the other part of that, which we've talked a lot about in the past couple episodes, is find that mentor and join groups of people that are within your industry or maybe outside of it, of various different backgrounds, and connect with them so that you can grow and you can blossom. You know, I think that having a mentor, as you said, is so important because there's that perspective. I remember when I was looking at colleges, I actually had considered Texas Tech University because my family had gone there. And I remember I wanted to do interior design, and I saw the fourth year's final projects, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything that creative to create something like that. And so I ended up taking a different path, ultimately the best path for me. But I think if I had, you know, somebody who was, that if I had connected with somebody who was in college and them explained to me, like, look, these are projects of people who have been nurturing their craft for 4 years. There's just a different perspective there. And when you're able to get that perspective from someone that's already in the field and doing those things, you're able to say, oh, I didn't think about that, or I didn't even consider this other part of this crucial piece of this whole puzzle. And so to your point, having a mentor is very important. So then my next question is, how do you go about finding the right mentor for you, in your opinion?
Well, that's that's an interesting question. Something just popped up on my screen. I'm going to try and get that out of the way so I can see you again. Okay, there we go.
Hey, good job.
So how do you get a mentor? Well, that's one of the things that the university is really helpful with is, you know, they talk to the students and they find out what the students' goals are, and then they try to place them with a mentor that has the skills or the experience to be able to mentor that person in the direction that they want to go. So, you know, I think that's something that TCU does really well, and the MBA program in particular does really well, is matching the mentor to the mentee.
How many different students are there that look for mentors every year?
Everyone.
How many is
Every
that?
one of our students has a mentor. And it's just, that's just
Is that
an
20
integral
or
part of
50
the
or
program.
1,000?
We have two cohorts of about, in the energy, I'm just talking about the
Yeah,
energy
energy,
MBA.
yeah.
So in the energy MBA program, we'll have two cohorts of 20 to 25. So we'll have, you know, roughly 45 people at any given time in the program.
Oh, that's great.
But I actually like to stay in touch with the students that I had a meeting not too long ago with a student that graduated 12 years ago. And it's just, I mean, that's so rewarding to be able to, you know, hear how their careers are going and, you know, how they're becoming successful. In fact, one of the things I've got to tell you a little story about the first day of class at TCU. So when I teach, I tell my students two things the first day of class. One is, don't ever ask me about your grades, because I don't care about your grades. And that's unusual for a teacher to tell students that he doesn't care about their grades. But
Sign me
what
up
I
for
tell
your class.
well, what I tell them is that I care about your skills. So ask me about your skills, and my goal for you is that when you graduate with that piece of paper 2 years from now, I want you to have the skills you need to compete for a C-level job at any company in America.
Right.
And the other thing that I tell them is if you don't have a financial goal, I'm a very commercial person, right? If you don't have a financial goal, my goal for you is I want you to be worth $5 million 5 years after you graduate.
Wow.
And you better start thinking about how you're going to get there right now.
Wow.
And in fact, we had a 10-year anniversary of the program, and about 60 of my students came back, and they gave me a fake check for $5 million. And it was, like 3 feet by 6 feet, and it said $5 million in 5 years, Energy MBA program, and it said Dr. Tom Bates. But that's the messaging that I want them to have. It's all about skills, and you need to have goals.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that.
Oh, go ahead, Jay.
No, I was going to say just that's a great way to do it. That's a great way to make them think. There is a way to. If you don't think about a goal, you'll never hit it, right? I mean, it's like
Exactly.
Zig Ziglar says. You got to have goals, and if you have one and you're going toward it every day, you think about it, man, that'd be awesome. Just like me and Jordan think about, hey, the Jay Young Show needs to have how many downloads or subscriber, whatever. In our business, the same thing. We talk about barrels of oil per day. What's our goal? How do we get there? Same thing, which is great. What about with you and talking about students? What has been the biggest? I don't want to say that. I say biggest win or biggest greatest thing that you've done or learned, or I guess what's the biggest thing that you teach? the best thing that you've done teaching wise that somebody can learn from on this show today, Dr. Tommy?
Well, I actually think it's the focus on skills, and I actually do a class at the end. It's not really part of Energy Macroeconomics, but it's what I call the CEO Skill Toolkit. Yeah. And I've been on the boards of 17 public companies.
Wow.
And in the course of my career, I have fired 44 CEOs.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And so I've hired 44 CEOs.
Right.
So that means I have very strong opinions about what I want in a CEO.
Well, I want to know what these opinions are. I want to know what you're looking for in a CEO. Absolutely. Let's go.
I want you to come to our company.
I applied and I was the perfect candidate, and I'd said, hello, Mr. Thomas Bates, which I will not call you Mr. Dr. Thomas Bates. I'm applying for this job as CEO. What would be on my resume?
The most important skill for a CEO, to be honest, is listening. Because if you think about it, and this is kind of an example I do for my students, and I ask them, who's the smartest person in the room? And somebody will always say, well, you are Dr. Bates, And then, of course, that's crazy. And the answer is, yes, I am the smartest person in the room. If the question is, what are my 7 grandsons' middle names? I am definitely the smartest person in the room. Right. But there's a whole bunch of questions where I'm not the smartest person in the room. But guess what? If we all think together and we all listen, we'll come up with the best possible answer. And so number one on my CEO skill toolkit is the ability to listen, because there's always someone with a better idea out there, and the mixture of good ideas will make you successful. Teams win, individuals don't win. It's like, how many Super Bowls did Tom Brady win?
7.
He didn't win any.
Oh. His team, though.
His team won.
It was a trick question, Jay.
And
that 7th thing going, so I just kind of fell into
win,
that.
And teams win in business too, right? Yeah. So teams win in business.
Yeah.
And of course, you always.
You're right, Jay. Tom Brady won 7 Super Bowls, but right?
Well, you always have the superstar players, right?
Yes,
You always have the people that are really, you know, your quarterback. But at the end of the day, the quarterback can't do what they need to do if the offensive line is not doing what they need to do, you
exactly.
know? And then the offensive line can't do what they need to do if the defense is not doing what they need to do. So, and that's one of the best things about football is that it is such an like everything is so tied together in that sport. But as you're saying, same thing with the team mentality as well. So on the flip side of the coin, you've said that you've also had to let go of 44 CEOs over your time on various boards. And so what, in your opinion, has been maybe a through line with those CEOs that you had to let go? Was it the lack of listening? Was it the lack of team
Absolutely. You
mentality?
nailed it. You get an A plus in my class. Okay?
Yes.
There you go.
It's the common denominator for CEOs who fail is that they don't listen. And they either don't listen to their management team around them, they don't listen to their shareholders, they don't listen to, they have a failure to listen in some critical part of the business, and that is what leads to failure.
Hey,
Wow.
I'm still got this thing back here. I love goals. I think it's a great idea to put goals into people's heads. I'm still trying to get through this 5 million in 5 years. Wow, that is a really. Does that mean I don't understand? How does somebody? And I'm a horned frog. My daughter plays volleyball there, Michaela. I love it. I think I got my good friend Jordan Jason went through the MBA program. You probably know Jordan at U.S. Energy. Incredible guy.
Yep.
And but I'm just sitting here thinking about how does somebody achieve? Do you also teach them how to get to 5 million in 5 years, or how does that how does that work?
Well, the CEO skill toolkit is part of it, right? So
Yeah.
having the skills, you need to be able to execute. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And then I actually go through an example of how private equity works because I spent 13 years in private equity, and so I talk about how you raise, how you raise money. Oh, my coffee just arrived.
There you
Okay,
go.
so now I am a happy
Hey,
camper.
there you go. What? I'm the only
Thanks,
one
Taylor.
without coffee.
So I talk about, how you raise money and how the carried interest works. And so I create this kind of fictional, this fictional partnership called Godfather Capital Partners because that's my
Godfather.
nickname is Godfather. So we go through Godfather Capital Partners and I hire 6 of them as managing directors and 9 of them as vice presidents. And I pay them a certain amount of money. We raise $1 billion and we go through that exercise. And based on the returns, then, they get, maybe $13 million after 5 years.
Yeah.
Or, if we do a 3X fund, then they make $27 million after 5 years. And it's all hypothetical, of course, but it inspires them to think about taking risk and getting rewarded for risk. And that's how you make $5 million in 5 years. Does anybody do it? I haven't had anybody do it yet, but you know what? Everyone is trying to do it, and that's the point.
Yeah.
And whether they get 5 million in 5 years or 8 years, or it's 2 million in 2.5 years, I want them thinking commercially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and when you think big and you are setting those big goals, I mean, look at Elon Musk, for example. His goals are ridiculously unattainable in the time frames that he sets them, and not all of them, but the ones that make the news obviously do. But the point is still the same. The point is, if I am setting a goal, even if I go in below the goal, I'm still reaching a point that was way higher than I was originally going to get to without having that big, hairy, audacious goal.
Absolutely.
And if you wouldn't have had it, if you wouldn't even thought about it, then where would you be? Like just day to day, not even thinking about a goal. But I love it. I think it's awesome. I mean, we have goals in our organization, and we do it every day, and we think about it. Because if you don't think about it, you're not gonna try to achieve anything. You're just gonna kind of go and okay, I'll just listening to this
Well,
podcast.
you lose the focus, right, Jay?
Yeah.
That's what we've talked a lot about. We talked about that with Sarah Magruder as well, was, keeping sharp focus on the things that are really impactful for your next step and then the steps thereafter. And so having those goals is really important. But one thing that I have struggled with, and I'm sure other people have struggled with as well, is how do you set the goal so that you can then reach it? So whenever you're teaching your students how to set these goals, what goes into consideration to be able to set them to achieve those goals?
Well, I mean, first of all, it has to be a big goal. You're not going to make $5 million in 5 years unless you have a big goal. So go out and shoot for the moon, but don't be afraid to recalibrate. And that's one of the things that, we do in business all the time. We set a target, a 3-year strategic plan, and it's the end of year one, and we might be doing better or we might be doing worse, but we recalibrate. I'll give you an example. So Firestone and Robertson Distilling Company developed a product that you probably heard of called TX whiskey.
Yes, I love TX whiskey.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
it's so good.
Okay, so I'm riding around on a golf cart with Troy Robertson, and he says, hey, I'm thinking about getting into vodka business. And he said, you were in private equity. Would you look at my business plan and give me some ideas? And so I looked at the business plan. Well, in between when I read the business plan and when they looked for funding, they decided, well, they had to recalibrate because vodka was too crowded.
Yeah.
So they wanted to do bourbon. But you can't get cash flow from bourbon right away because you put it in barrels and it ages for
Right.
4 years, right? So you got no cash flow. So what they decided to do was come up with a blended whiskey, buy whiskey from other distillers that had extra whiskey. So from Maker's Mark and Jim Beam and Jack Daniels, and then blend it with a vanilla finish so that it appealed to both men and women. Okay.
Well, it's appealing.
Wow.
And every business plan that you see, you're going to supposed to have sales this much in 3 years, and 90% of them underachieve. TX whiskey doubled the targets.
Wow.
Wow.
I mean, phenomenal results. Okay.
Oh, wow.
And we ultimately ended up selling the business to Pernod Ricard, but it was a huge success story, right?
No,
Because
I remember when it was first starting, I had a friend who was native, he had grown up in Texas and I was living in Florida at the time. He had gone home and come back and he was like, I have this amazing whiskey you have to try. This was back in like 2018. Or 17 or so. And he was like, you can only get this in Texas. It's the most amazing. It's even called TX whiskey. You have to try this. I remember trying it and I was like, wow, this is so good. So yeah, no, that's a great story. And to be able to come out on top and it super exceed expectations.
yes.
Wow.
And
Bravo.
I was one of the founding investors in that, and it's just a great story. And I tell that story to my students all the time. So that encourages. In fact, when they graduate, I give them a bottle of TX whiskey, and I write in the T and the X $5 million in 5 years, and then I sign my name.
That's
That's
awesome.
great.
That is really good. So let me ask you this: what's been some of the biggest challenges that you've seen with business or people, or what's kind of the top? I don't know, whatever. Just think about what do people hit up against that wall and they like your idea, they get all excited. It's kind of like going to a motivational speech, and you get so excited you run into the garage because you miscalculate the garage. You run into it because you're so excited when you get home, and then reality sets in the next day, and people come around. You turn on the news, and there's all this bad stuff. And what's the worst thing that has happened, and how do you help people get over it?
So, there's a lot of things that you need to be successful in business, but three of the key things are access to capital, strategy, and people. And you can't succeed without all three of those. The biggest problem that the energy business has had over the last, say, 15 to 20 years is allocation of capital. There was a time when the oil business, particularly, let's say the 2011 to 2014 timeframe, where oil companies were being valued by production growth and not by return on capital employed. And so they
Oh.
tended to access too much capital. Okay. They borrowed too much money, they raised too much equity, and they ended up with a flawed balance sheet. And so they weren't stable when oil prices came down. And you remember November of 2014 when OPEC met, they thought that they were going to cut production by 1 million barrels a day, and they increased production by 1 million barrels a day. And the price of oil, which had averaged about $100 a barrel for the previous 2.5 years, went to $26 a barrel 15 months later. And it
Yeah.
was a disaster. And the balance sheets were not robust enough to be able to survive that kind of loss of cash flow. And so I think one of the serious problems that we've had in the energy industry is capital discipline. And now you're seeing particularly in the oil and gas business, people are much more capital disciplined. They're distributing cash to shareholders. They're buying back shares. The discipline with capital in the oil and gas business is completely different than it was 15 years ago. There's still some industries that haven't figured that out. So some emerging industries like offshore wind, okay? Offshore wind's been a disaster because they've overcapitalized the business. They're not making profits. And you saw, like at the end of last year, big companies like Equinor and Ørsted and all of the big offshore wind players took billions of dollars in write-offs because they invested in stuff that just wasn't working. So I think a common theme for success has to be good capital discipline. The companies that I work with, the public companies that I work with, now all have return on invested capital targets for the senior management team, and over a 3-year period of time, if they meet their targets, then they get rewarded. So the shareholders are now asking for more capital discipline than we've seen in the past, and honestly, it's paying off.
What a hard industry too. I mean, the oil and gas business is I mean, you could be doing extremely well, good, EBITDA. You can have good, debt against equity. I mean, you can have all these different things going with you, just 100%, and something that is 100% out of your control, happens, and all of a sudden, like the falling of oil prices. I mean, 2015, 16, I mean, all of a sudden, it's just like, man, price goes to almost zero or whatever, and then all of a sudden it's just like, man, things aren't worth anything. And then investors, especially in our sector, don't understand that, and so they just kind of, just go, wow, I don't understand. I'm getting the check, now I'm not, and what's going on? And we're trying to redeploy capital during this time to get to the next level because it is such a hard industry. What do you see in the future? What's coming up in the future in energy? What do you think about that? What's coming up?
So, look, I think it's going to be a menu-driven approach, and that's one of the things that at the Ralph Lowe Energy Institute and in the Energy MBA program at TCU, we try to be energy agnostic. So the traditional background at TCU is oil and gas, but now we teach a lot in renewables and solar and wind, and I had 4 students from the nuclear power industry in my class last year. So we're becoming much more diversified. And I think, honestly, the solution to energy for the next 30 years is going to be very much menu driven. Take a look at ERCOT, for example. So this is the grid in Texas. And we have a lot of solar power, and solar power, because the technology is affordable today. In 2009, a megawatt hour of solar generated energy cost $360. Today, it costs $36.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh.
so we've seen a 90% because technology has gotten better. Wind,
Right.
that same megawatt hour produced by wind was $135 a megawatt hour, and today it's $38 a megawatt hour. So technology has changed and made renewables much more competitive. Now, natural gas is very competitive because natural gas can produce electric power for the same cost. So what's the difference between renewables and natural gas in Texas, in ERCOT? Well, sometimes the sun doesn't shine. We
Right.
know more or less predictably when the sun is going down every day. And we know there's no solar power then. We can't predict when the wind isn't going to blow. So
Right.
it's intermittent, but it's unpredictably intermittent as opposed to solar, which is predictably intermittent. So when the sun goes down and the wind isn't blowing, we have to dispatch maybe 50 gigawatts into the grid from natural gas. And wind and solar can come down by like 40 gigawatts in a matter of a couple of hours. So you need natural gas fired power generation to be able to dispatch into the grid. Otherwise, people are freezing in
Right.
Texas. And that's unacceptable. The CEO of the Southern Company in an interview once said, was asked what her most important job is. And she said, when my customers flip the light switch, the lights damn well better go on. And that's what we have in Texas because we have balance, right? So when we need electric power and the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, we've got natural gas. So we have a menu-driven solution to the energy needs of the state of Texas. And frankly, I think that's where we're going to be for the next 30 years. We need more natural gas-fired power generation, not less. And we need it to supplement wind and solar when they're not working. And in fact, if you look at Europe, Europe has a failed energy policy. They invested too heavily in solar, too heavily in wind. And 6 months before the invasion of the Ukraine by Russia, they had a power crisis in Europe because the wind stopped blowing in the North Sea. And the price of power went up by a factor of 10.
Wow.
You know, the historical record, it gets really fuzzy here, and people will blame that on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you go back and look at the timestamps, it happened 6 months before. So we have failed energy policy in Europe. We have a beautiful energy policy in the state of Texas. Every country in the world should look at how Texas operates, how ERCOT operates, and they should export that grid model to every other nation in the world. The world would be a much better place if Texas ran it.
Wow.
Well, it definitely makes me want to sign up for your class because I love how passionate you are about all things energy. I love how you break down the topic so that it's comprehensive for those that are listening to it. So I just have two more questions here. Jay, I don't know how many more you have. So before I start asking those questions, is there any other last questions you have, Jay?
Man, I've got 100. I don't, man, I just really enjoyed today. It's been such a great conversation. And I do want to come over and see more about the School of Business. And that's our goal for Michaela to get into the energy program there at TCU. Go Frogs. And not only watch volleyball, but go Frogs. And they're playing, I think, Utah.
Come over for a football game. I've got tickets to all the football games. So just bring your daughter and come for a football game.
I'd love to. And I tell you, she's able to go to more games this year than she was last year because of travel and volleyball. But I'd love to, and I'll definitely take you up on that. I want to know more about the school of the Neely School, the Neely School,
the Neely School of Business, and
Neely School of Business, and the
Energy MBA program, and the Raplow Energy Institute.
Wow, unbelievable! And I love the way that you're putting that influence on people, and you're passionate about helping kids and giving them goals and all that. I think it's just incredible, and I mean when Jennifer Castillo, who's with King Operating, talked about you, and she said, you need to have this guy on your show. I'm like, okay, tell me more. And she said something about what you do. And I'm like, that guy is definitely a mentor. That's somebody you look up to. That's somebody that you really want to have around because you're going to teach people and you're going to put your heart into it, which is awesome because I know that we've had a lot of professors out there, and I'm not going to mention any names, but we've had a lot of professors out there that really don't care anything about anything about except getting a check and hoping you fail because no, I'm just kidding. But let's not go there.
It does
But
feel that way sometimes.
Yeah,
I hear what
let's
you're
just
saying.
say.
I want you to know why Jennifer's doing what she's doing. It's one reason. She wants to be worth $5 million in 5 years.
There you go.
She drank the Kool-Aid, and she's going to execute.
I love
I
it.
think we're all drinking the Kool-Aid after this talk for
Man,
sure.
absolutely.
Well, you have some. If you have a young person that's looking into getting into the energy industry, and we like to help those young professionals shape their view of expectations whenever they're entering into the energy industry. What advice would you give to a young professional entering the energy sector?
Well, there are a couple of things. For a very young professional, I would say be energy agnostic. Don't get married to one particular form of energy because the solution, we may not even know what the solution is going to be. I mean, lithium batteries or, some kind of zinc bromide batteries the technology could change, the cost curve could change. So don't go in with preconceived notions. For someone that's maybe a little bit further along, my best advice is learn how to hit a slider. and that's a metaphor for I have the knowledge because my son played baseball at TCU. I used to catch him when he was in high school, and I know how to hit a slider. Okay, personally, I know how to hit a slider. I see that red dot. I see the spin. I know where the ball is going. Can I hit a slider? No. Okay, I can't execute. So there's a huge difference between knowledge and the skills to be able to execute. Okay. And that's the differentiator.
Wow.
That's where a CEO is really successful, is they take the knowledge from people around them and they deliver results. And if you deliver results, say the average CEO in the Fortune 500 makes almost $20 million a year. Okay.
Wow.
So you don't have to work very long to make that $5 million, right? So about a quarter of a year. So the point is knowledge is important, but the ability to execute and deliver results is what differentiates. That's where success is. So understand the difference between knowledge and the ability to execute and deliver results.
It's awesome. Hey, we need to talk, Jordan, about the Stephen Paul came on the show, the last show or the show before, I can't remember, but we have a guy that wants to start picking up liquor stores around the country or around Dallas-Fort Worth, and he has one. He's going to buy another. He's already buying another one right now. They're doing renovations, and they're going to do it. And he wants to buy like 15 to 20 around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we've talked about that. I think it's an incredible idea because you have something that's obviously scalable. It's definitely scalable, which you have to have in a business model. You have to have something that is needed, and liquor is needed during this time of year, especially. And it's something that you could just do over and over and over again, which is obviously the scalable type. But it's not like you have a Starbucks there, and Starbucks, that's a great model, but they have to go build a store every time they want to increase their exposure in a different city. Build a store.
Yeah.
Well, this is you're buying liquor stores like you buy apartment complexes and just continue doing that. So it's an incredible. I need to send you his business plan. I'd like for you to look at it. He's raising some capital. I've talked to him about, hey, we can find a few friends to put $100,000 in or something. But I'd like your idea or your thoughts about what he's doing or what his game plan, his business plan is, because I think it's a really great idea. But I also think I'd love to have your input on what he thinks.
I'll take a look.
But I'd like to know. I mean, the TX whiskey is unbelievable. TX whiskey, is that it?
TX whiskey.
Yes.
That's an incredible story. I'm sure you have a lot of great stories like that. And I know is there one more you want to share before Jordan closes us out?
Let's see, a story.
Private equity.
Well, I'm just going to come back to, listening is the most important skill that a CEO has. I got my first big job at a company called Schlumberger, worldwide company operated in 132 countries around the world. I took a job in a division that had lost money every year for 12 years.
Oh, wow.
And every previous CEO of that division, had lasted 3 years and then got fired, right? So it was a high risk, job for me to take. And so the very first thing I did was I went on a listening tour. So I got on an airplane and I went to Asia. I went to the Middle East. I went to Europe. I went to South America. And all I did was listen. And then I had a kind of a town hall meeting where I brought people in and I sat in the back with all of my direct reports. We weren't allowed to talk for 2 days. And you'd be amazed at how much we learned by listening.
Wow.
Right.
So, and ultimately that company went from $140 million and a $15 million loss in 1992 through organic growth was $750 million in revenue and $120 million for the net income in 5 years.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
And
Talk
I
about a
attribute that
success story.
to listening, right?
A
Listening.
listening tour. I think you need to trademark that. That's great.
That is true. Very true. Jordan, you'll close us out?
Yeah, one last question for you here. That is, if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self. I mean, you've done so many things, from entering into what you thought was going to be for fast cars, then switching over to the energy industry, then working with Schlumberger or SLB, whichever. I always get confused as to what they want to be called. And then going from that to teaching. If you're looking back at your full career and your professional life, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
Get a mentor.
Wow.
Done.
I love that. I've asked a couple of guys, I said, hey, just come over and shadow me for a day. I mean, we've got meetings because you never know what really goes on in all these big buildings around here and on the inside. But if you could find somebody and you could shadow them for a day, just a day or an afternoon or whatever the case may be, it's really helpful to know what goes on and what to get prepared and how can you be, how can I help you, learn about what you want to do? Because get passionate about something. Obviously, set your goals and then get to the next level. So that's great. That's great. I'll tell you what, it's been incredible having you on the show, Dr. Thomas Bates, Tommy Bates, Tom Bates, whatever you want to be called. I love calling you anything.
Tommy boy.
Just call you.
Tommy boy.
Call me whatever, but just call me, right? But you've been incredible, and I tell you what, there's no telling how many people right now, and I know Jennifer's included, about people that you've changed their lives and changed their way of thinking, because that's one of the biggest things that I did in college. I mean, you got to have something, but you got to change your thinking and change about what you want to do, and we go from. It was nickel beer back then. I think it's gone to a $50 or something today. But about what you do in college and what it's so important when you get out and where you go. And I tell you what, I know you've been a mentor to so many and just an inspiration to so many. And I know that you don't get enough thanks from all your students, but I know that even if you don't, you know that they do appreciate you. So. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
I get plenty of thanks. Just being able to interact with them it makes everything worthwhile.
Yeah.
They're so thirsty for knowledge, so ambitious, and to see them achieve success that's the goal. Help them succeed.
I think I'm gonna come over and shadow you. Can I come over and shadow you?
Well, let's have lunch.
All right, we'll do lunch. That's good. I love it. Well, Jordan, hey, it's been great seeing you today.
Yeah, you as well.
You look great, and appreciate you being here today. And everybody, Dr. Thomas Bates, it's been a pleasure, and I appreciate you being on today. And everybody, I think that this concludes today. But stay tuned Thomas, you got anything you want to close with?
Now go Frogs.
No, go Frogs. Hey, we're playing tonight in Texas Tech, Lubbock. We're playing at Texas Tech and Lubbock volleyball. Stay tuned. We'll hopefully last week half the team was sick, and we got through that and played BYU, won BYU. The volleyball or football is at, I think we're at Utah. Yeah, at Utah.
We are at Utah Saturday night.
Utah
I'll
this
be there.
week. So, man, let's don't talk about Texas OU. Let's just talk about go Frogs. But anyway, everybody have a great time. Thank you for being here. Until next time,
Yeah,
thanks
till
for coming.
Friday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.